Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live stream today. As a voice teacher, I assume we have a lot of voice teachers listening today. As a voice teacher, you've probably spent 4 years or more and thousands of dollars on a Western classical degree that was supposed to prepare you to sing anything. But as soon as you started teaching voice lessons, you realized the things you learned weren't helping your popular music style students get the results either of you wanted. And today, the wonderful Shannon Coates is going to share a few things you probably didn't learn in your Western classical degree that will help you serve your popular music style students. So if you're here, we would love to know where you're tuning in from. If you are joining us from the Popular and Commercial Music Voice Teachers Group, we won't be able to see your name. Because Restream doesn't let us see names of people who are tuning in from groups. So either just put your name in your comment, or you can go to this link, chat.restream.io/FB, and register, and we can see your name. Either way, doesn't matter. Just so you know, we can't see your names if you're in the group. But everywhere else, if you're on the Singing and Popular Music's page, we can see your name. If you're on YouTube, we can see your name. So let us know where you're tuning in from, and we're excited to talk about this. So I am Jessica Baldwin. I'm the head popular music's voice specialist and artistry coach at True Colors Voice and Artist Development. I'm also the creator and editor of Singing and Popular Music's, which is a website where we help voice teachers feel confident and have fun working with popular music's singers. Here with me today is Dr. Shannon Coates, vocal pedagogy expert and creator of the Voice Ped Undegree and the Vocal Instrument 101. They help independent voice teachers teach their faces off, quote unquote, without rearranging their entire life and business to go back to school. So welcome, Shannon.
Yay, happy to be here. Hi, Jeff. I see your comment in there too.
Hey, Jeff. Oh, yeah,
From
Zealand.
Zealand.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's get to the good stuff. If you hear something that really appeals to you, use hashtag insight in the comments to share your takeaways. That lets us know things that are appealing to you, and it also helps you remember it better when you type it in. All right, so Shannon, lay it on us. What are some stuff we need to know about what's different about those Western classical music degrees?
So I wanted to start by saying that the main thing, I think, and we can talk about this too. If you happen to disagree at some point, do let me know. That's all good too. I think one of the main things is that there's some philosophical ideas that come down when we do a Western classical degree. And as I like to say as well, if you did a music theater degree or you did a jazz degree, the majority of the folks who are teaching music theater degrees and who are teaching jazz degrees, even to this day, did a Western classical degree. Or they did something, or they themselves studied with someone who came from a Western classical background. So these philosophies, even if you didn't do a Western classical degree, but you studied with someone who did, these philosophies kind of trickle down without us really even realizing that we've taken them on. So some of these philosophies, and I'll say too that these philosophies lead to not great pedagogy overall, but are particularly challenging if we're working in popular music. So one of these philosophical tropes that kind of come down are that classical music is morally superior to other musics, and by that I mean it is a higher art form. So we get this sort of idea, and this is not something necessarily that anybody will say, although I have heard people say it, but this isn't necessarily something that you'll hear explicitly said. Yes, classical music and classical whatever is like the highest art form. You may not hear someone say that explicitly, but this attitude, this philosophical idea trickles down, and it really does come into your training. The other one that goes along with that then is that classical technique is the healthiest technique. So if you learn to sing with a classical technique, then you're going to be protected, if you will, from injury. And what goes hand in hand in that one is if you're injured, then you didn't get good technique. So there's a that one is really gross. And that one has been said explicitly. I've heard that one said explicitly many times. And even to this day, I've heard many times people saying like, well, the healthiest technique is classical technique. Okay, so we'll leave that one in there. The other one is that you must read music in order to be a quote good musician. So you must be able to, and along with that one is that you must learn your music from the score. So the score is the ultimate, guide, or the ultimate Bible, if you will, for the music. Along with that comes some sounds are bad. So we get right. So that goes kind of along with the classical music being a higher art form and the technique being the healthiest technique. So then we get some sounds are bad. And again, that's a moral standpoint, right? That isn't coming from good pedagogy at all. That's just a moral standpoint. And how are sounds bad or good?
Yeah.
Two more. One is that vocal technique is more important than communication. And or if you learn your technique, everything else will follow. So those two things come together, and they're insidious. This is insidious. And I mean, if you did a Western classical undergraduate degree, so I have 3 Western classical music degrees, right? So like, I know what I'm talking about here in terms of what the institution says.
Yeah.
So if you did a Western classical music degree undergrad, I would love to know whether you had a class on acting as part of your degree. Did you learn any kind of acting skills or dramatic skills as part of your degree? Likely not. And I went to a very good institution, a very good degree, and we had lots and lots of performance classes. The performance classes were all based on, Italian diction, English diction, French diction, German diction, oratorio, opera arias. Like these are all based on specific styles, and not based on communication. So we get this insidious little thing that says to us, if I can sing well, if my technique is good, nothing else matters.
Right.
Or it doesn't matter whether I'm communicating or not, right?
Yeah.
So we get this it gets in there insidiously. And again, that one is never said explicitly, and you will likely never hear, yes, Fabienne, talking about yes, exactly. So, and that one is never said explicitly. And in fact, you will hear teachers say, no, it's just as important that you act. But like, I've been to a lot of professional operas, and I'll tell you, that doesn't seem true, that it's just as important that you act. That doesn't seem true in the long run.
Yeah.
In classical Western music. Anyway, and then one other, there is one sound or one tonal outcome goal, and I, the teacher, know how to get you to that goal. Right? So I, the teacher, am kind of the arbiter of whether or not you are doing the right thing in your technique. So all of those philosophies come down. Again, some of them can be just insidious and we don't even realize that they're there in the backs of our minds. And all of those philosophies come down, and they can be, until we acknowledge them, and until we're explicit about acknowledging those in our own brains, we transfer those into our teaching and into our pedagogy, right? So that affects how we teach. And it affects how we teach in all styles. It's not great pedagogy in all styles to think that you are the one true arbiter of like how you need to sound, even in Western classical music. That's not great pedagogy, but it's particularly egregious when we start to teach in our popular styles. So yeah, I'll stop there for a minute. Is there anything you want to jump in with?
Well, Kelly Young commented and said, it's amazing how many of my singers don't understand the concept of song itself, and and what they're singing about and how to connect with an audience and general stagecraft. It's totally disconnected.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And that becomes, it comes out of our pedagogy then, right? Where when we get into an independent studio, and we start to teach, and we have in the back of our heads that even in popular musics or in music theater or in Western classical, if we're teaching Western classical, we are the teacher, the person in the room who is the arbiter of what that needs to sound like. So there are really strong parameters around how we can sound in Western classical music simply because we're unamplified. So I'm on stage, I'm unamplified. There are really specific coordinations that are required in order to be heard unamplified through my entire range over an orchestra, in front of a chorus, etc. Right? So that is true, and it takes a long time for your body to figure out those coordinations. And it takes a great teacher to help you negotiate those coordinations. Absolutely true. But even within those very strong parameters in Western classical music, and those parameters are not there at all in popular musics, right? They're just not there at all in popular musics. So even within the strong parameters of, if we're teaching Western classical music, I am still, as the teacher, not the arbiter of what you have to sound like. I am still not the judge of what you have to sound like. I am in Western classical music. I am the person who is going to guide you toward that and is going to say, you know what, that choice there, you're not going to be heard in a hall. I love the choice. It's a great choice. Let me help you find the choice that is going to, in the coordination, that is going to make sure that you cut, right? Let's find that and make sure that you're understood in your languages and blah, 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 all that stuff. Absolutely. But in popular musics, when I'm the arbiter of the sound, we lose the whole point of popular music, right? Then that becomes why I should be out there singing if I am the arbiter of the sound. You're not coming to me to figure out what you should sound like in popular musics. So we, especially again, if we've been trained Western classical music, we bring that with us into the studio. And we kind of bring that with us into our popular musics and music theater to a certain extent as well. We bring that with us and say, like, no, this is what you should sound like. And we say, no, that's an unhealthy, or that's a bad sound. So rather than giving, like, that's where the moral thing comes down to, right? Where we say, oh, that's a bad sound. Mm-hmm. Rather than, this is a choice you're making and it's amazing. Here are some of the potential consequences of making that choice over time. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't make that choice. I'm just saying here are some options to find a different coordination so that the potential consequences are less over time if you want to continue making that choice.
Yeah.
We just don't get to say, like, no, that's a bad sound.
Right.
Or that's an unhealthy sound, right? No unhealthy sounds. There are sounds that may have consequences for you long term. Sure. Yeah. I'll go with that. But, like, maybe I'm willing to take those consequences. Maybe I'm willing to do that.
Right.
Totally.
And I think, there's, for instance, consequences. If we're constantly just labeling something healthy or unhealthy, that doesn't take into account that, let's say, a sound, if you made it constantly, right, a consequence might be this. Yeah. But in many cases, singers don't want to make that sound constantly. They just want to make it occasionally. And it's not going to be something that is going to have the same consequence because of the frequency with which they want to use it. So rather than saying, no, I'm sorry, you can never use that. Yeah. We just say, okay, you're using this occasionally. This might be what happens. And honestly, we never know for sure. Bodies are so different. Vocal folds are so different from person to person, and what happens. So yes, absolutely. Just talking about potential consequences, admitting that we don't know for sure, is so important. Yeah, I feel like the psychological consequences of these philosophies and what they do to our singers, even without talking about how it creates some bad pedagogy, we're just setting them up to feel damaged. We're setting them up to feel faulty or less than, dumber. I mean, you know what I mean? All those philosophies, just when we bring that stuff into the studio, it's really difficult so either the singer says, well, screw you, I'm going somewhere where someone doesn't think of me this way. Yeah. Or they take it on. Yeah. Right. And then they can't actually be what they want to be. They can't be who they want to be, use their voice in the way they want to use it. Yeah. And so that is I've had a lot of people in my studio who've sadly had some of those experiences. And, we don't need to do that. We don't need to keep bringing that in. And I think we perpetuate them because they probably made us feel that way at some point in time. And if we didn't take them on, then we were less than, and we were not as smart, and we were not as classy, and we were not, so we take that stuff
Absolutely.
on and pass it on. It's such a bummer that we
Well,
have done that.
I think, like what I said as well earlier, is that I think so often it's so insidious and not explicit that until something like this happens, where you're listening to some, you and I, or something like that, where you go, oh, wait a minute, yeah, I do think that. I would never, like, intentionally harm somebody. Of course you wouldn't. Of course not. And I would never intentionally inflict something on a singer like that. Of course you wouldn't. But oh shoot, yeah, I do see that. Until it's made explicit, sometimes you just don't know it's there, right?
Right.
You just don't realize it. And you're trying to do your best for your students. And so this is what you were told was the best. So this is how I'm going to do the best for my students, right? So then how can you, how can you, until it's made explicit, you can't change it.
Right. I think many people, they're not meaning to be harmful.
Of course. Yeah.
I
Of
think
course.
I can't think of a single person who's actually meaning to be harmful. Yeah.
Yeah,
There was an interesting, just an anecdote. A colleague of mine was working with a person who had gone through a Western classical degree, and talking about the like morally better, right, or a higher art form.
Yeah.
So this teacher was sort of new to different CCM styles of singing, and my colleague loves country bluegrass stuff, and this teacher working with her said, "So when did you decide that this stuff was not beneath you?" Right. And the teacher did not, I don't think, meant that in a harmful way, but it was certainly like, it's not beneath, no music is beneath anybody. It's such a, yeah, but it's common. It was interesting to hear her be as explicit about that thought as she was, but yep.
And I think, just along those same lines, I think when we're, there's something that comes into, okay, so I'm going to just pull this from my background. In my background, the harder you work, the more you deserve, the better off you are, right? So this is like, and the better person you are, the harder you work, right? Like, with zero thought given to what kind of work, right? And so if you're doing work, especially in academia, and if you do this kind of work toward excellence, a very specific kind of excellence, then that is prioritized as a higher, like, art form, a higher calling, a higher blah blah blah. And that's 100% my background, and obviously, I'm very Western. And so that's my background, and I don't think I'm alone in that kind of perception, and in not questioning what do we mean by work. So then when we get to Western classical training, because it does take more work in a specific sense, it takes more work to get the coordination to be able to sing unamplified. But it's only that parameter that we're talking about, right? So we're like, ooh, and we prioritize that parameter, that one little parameter around the work it takes to get the coordination to be able to sing unamplified and heard on a stage. So we prioritize that parameter. I mean, there are other things too. You have to, there are other things for sure. But we somehow prioritize that one thing and say, that's what makes this a higher art form. And that's what makes this like a morally better art form and morally better technique, et cetera, et cetera. But we never question, why am I prioritizing that one parameter? Like, why is that one parameter the thing that makes this a morally superior art form? What? Like,
right.
Because there are so many other ways to work,
right,
and so many other ways to learn a thing, right?
Right. Like, and even that work is a morally superior thing, right?
Yes.
So both of those things put together.
Yes.
And to not acknowledge the work that goes into every other style of music, as if these people don't, myself included, don't put time and effort into skill and learning and, all the other stuff that goes into it. It's all,
100%.
yeah,
Which,
absolutely. And that's true. That's one parameter. It's
yeah.
just, yep,
And we have, we have prioritized that one parameter, that
right.
one thing,
It's true.
as being like, because you have to do all of this very specific coordination. Anyway.
Yeah, it's true. And the reading music, right? Like Fabian mentioned,
Reading music. Yes,
that's
Fabian. Yeah.
those two seem like the biggest ones that pop up as priorities in terms of the work that goes
100%.
into those two skills.
Yes. And music.
Yeah.
I think the other, I mean, I loved the live that you did last week about like taking away the fear of letting your students choose their own repertoire, right? Especially in popular music, right? Like just have at it. Let's do
Yeah.
this thing.
Yep.
Because I think that is also for, if I've had a Western classical training, boy, that does not seem like the right pedagogy at all to be able to let students choose their own repertoire. Dude, that's not good. Like, how could that possibly go well? Like, students don't know anything. I know everything. How could that go well? Right? So and of course that kind of all comes back into the teacher as the arbiter of all of the knowledge system that we've set up, and also comes down into academic training too. I'm just looking at some of the comments here too.
Yeah. So Jeff has some students who've been dealing with some, past voice teacher trauma, and nobody wants to demonize any teachers. We just all have to learn how we can better help our students. Yeah. And Kelly says it can be difficult sometimes to accept that training in pedagogy has developed since we trained ourselves as singers. Yeah, it keeps growing, doesn't it?
Yeah,
we keep learning more.
Yeah.
And so much of what we have leaned on in terms of research in pedagogy was done in institutions with people who were primarily classical singers. And so we still don't really have very much information research-wise about how popular music singers do their thing. And they don't care. On the whole, they don't care what we think or know about what they're doing. They just want to be effective as performers and singers,
Yeah.
We're not here to try to impress academia with with what we do. So it's really up to the teachers in academia to want to learn from this population so that we can then bring that knowledge into spaces to better serve them. Yeah. I love your thoughts on talking about choices. Like I feel like overall, I don't think it's just in popular music or voice teacher world or anything. I feel like we have, as part of our just culture, continually moved into a space where it's not so much about someone being a mentor or leader and saying, this is how you do it this way. I'm the one who knows, and I'm going to tell you how, and you just follow my directions, and that's it. So much more of what we're doing now has to do with like facilitating, coaching, helping people make their own choices and decide for themselves who they want to be. And I feel like, that's so necessary in popular music, because the point of being a popular music artist is to do something no one's ever done before. There is literally no way to know what their path is going to look like because no one's taken it.
Yeah.
So you and the artist are both figuring that out together. And you're alongside them. You are not, and behind them. Really, they're the leader. They're the one who gets to choose what that path is and which directions they want to take. And I wonder how that's going to continue to feed into actually classical culture. Because I think there are shifts that are need to happen for this art form to continue to be the beautiful thing that it is, and to grow and to make new stuff. So for us 100%. To continue to let that mindset happen in the classical realm as well, so that we can do cool new things, new art forms, using some of those sounds.
Yeah, this is a change that is happening in education overall. So educational philosophy is changing overall and I mean that in education, in classroom education. independent teachers were often way behind the classroom education because we're not getting it right. So this philosophy around student-led learning, student-led assessments, backward assessment, understanding how we're facilitating learning rather than this top-down teachers always right, that is changing in the educational streams, and then moving into our independent studios, and heaven only knows when it'll get to academia, but God love us over there in academia because there's so many other things happening there. But that is definitely a change, a philosophical change in the education world. And part of that too, like it's interesting too in our independent studios, and some of this came up a little while ago on Facebook too, around the actual initial meaning of the word pedagogy, which is the philosophy in education around teaching children. So initially, we were talking about all of the structures and all of the education, the philosophy, what we do to teach children. So, and it was pretty explicitly geared toward classroom teaching. And then teaching adults, a different kind of teaching, right? And has a different now pedagogy, that word has now become synonymous with just basically the philosophy of teaching without the specification toward children. And the independent teaching studio certainly we certainly teach a lot of children, certainly, and teenagers, but so many of us also have a large adult population in our studios as well, unless we focus specifically on teaching children. So I think there's also a little bit of this kind of transfer starting to happen where, because there is a difference between teaching an adult singer or an independent, someone who's a little bit more independent and a child. But the philosophy, so some of the philosophy that we have discovered for ourselves when we're teaching adults, where we're like, yeah, I can't really boss this person around because they're their own person here. And they actually have their own ideas around what, like, so I'm doing more of a hand, like side by side, not hand holding, side by side, like kind of philosophy here. And that's starting to leak over as well, I think. I mean, not just the greater educational shift, but I think that's also starting to leak over a little bit as well as we start to talk about this and make it explicit, where teachers are saying, so how can I work with children and teenagers in such a way that I'm not the like, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, but where children are having options and choices and learning in ways that are deeper learning and where they're discovering, which we know is a better way to learn anyway. So I think there's a double kind of transition happening in that philosophy, not only in the greater world, but also as teachers, kind of see what's working with their adult students and seeing what I can do with my younger students as well. I love it. I love that.
Yeah, Kelly's talking about how was trained in musical theater, moved into pop because that's what paid the bills. Moving classical approach to pop has both helped and hindered. Musicians seem to respect you more as a vocalist, as someone who can read music and understand it. And I'll just say here, like, what musicians are we talking about? I will say that. And really got better at pop by watching other singers who didn't train. Absolutely. I mean, I can't guarantee it, but I can almost guarantee it that you're going to learn how to sing pop by listening to people who didn't have anybody messing around in there trying to have them make classical sounds. And some do have vocal issues. Absolutely. Sure. But so do classical singers.
Yeah. So do classical singers. 100%.
Yeah. Band leaders. I'll say, I have worked with both. Let's see, if we're talking about, because I've sung in jazz bands. And so there can be jazz band leaders, horn players who were like, oh, the vocalist who reads, because that is still a reading centric
jazz,
genre, big band, stuff like that. And then people who kind of go and from that into other spaces. There's a great like funk band here where I live, where they all did jazz stuff. So they do read for their gigs, but only the horn players. Nobody else is looking at any music the whole time they're playing. But I think, regardless of genre, I have had people who are not familiar with music at all, or what even happens in a college degree, who just are impressed by someone going to college for music.
Right.
And I get bummed.
Right.
Right. If they think I'm more impressive because I went to college for
Yeah.
music as opposed to this other person who's doing amazing music stuff their whole life without having going to college, I think that speaks to the issues that we're talking about in terms of passing down these philosophies. It's not just within our it's not within academia or offshoots of it. It's really pervasive throughout the whole culture that somehow we're better musicians or somehow we're, and that's not, it's not reality.
100%.
Because again, what makes music great? And that goes back to your, vocal technique being the most important thing. If you sound great and you're not connecting with people, it does not matter.
Who cares?
It's really,
Who
it's not
cares?
something that is that important. I mean, if you want to make great, if you want to be with a group of people who can really appreciate a certain way that you are using your muscles, and that's how they know to think about those muscles, and they're going to appreciate that with you, great. That is not the vast majority of people. Most people, it's like a mathematician doing a math equation up on the board and other mathematicians going, oh, that's beautiful, and everybody else is like, I don't know math.
So,
I don't know how to be excited about this.
And as I alluded to before, I mean, I have been in, I've seen a lot of professional opera, and if I can close my eyes and enjoy it more, why am I at the freaking theater, right? Like, if everything that's happening on stage is not drawing me in as much as the voices and what's happening with the voice, with that technically perfect voice, or even musically beautiful voice, like even if they're communicating something beautiful with the voice, but everything else that's happening on that stage is like, what? Like, it's so boring and brutal and not connected to the voice at all. Why am I even here? Why am I here? I may as well have bought the recording and listen to it in my house, right? Like, I don't need to. And why did you spend, like, opera is a very expensive art form. So why are we spending all of this money to put out really subpar performances that, and I think this is part of the thing about music theater often versus opera, where we're all the old bark and park, exactly, or park and bark, exactly, Fabienne. And I think this is, folks in the opera world are not, in the Western classical world, are not unaware of the fact that, audiences are requiring that this is actually entertaining, right? Not just to my ear. But I think that's part of the thing. When I see music theater, when I see professional music theater, or even amateur music theater, when I see any kind of music theater, I am very rarely disappointed at the entertainment and the communication. Very rarely disappointed. When I see professional opera, I go in with my friggin' fingers crossed and consider it a great performance if I've enjoyed it, like, thoroughly, from not just the great singing, right? Like, so, like, I'm not sure in my opera, I'm not sure. And then when I see a band, I'm like nearly 100% going to be happy. I like, because they wouldn't be a professional performing band if they weren't doing something that was connecting, right? Like, I wouldn't, it's almost 100% that I'm going to be, like, thrilled.
Yeah.
And as Fabian said, sometimes the vocal issue is what actually makes you even more special, or makes you even more, intriguing and able to communicate. So, like, even if I'm listening to a band where I'm like, ooh, I hope at some point you might have a few other options to make that sound. Even if my voice teacher head is like, oh, if they're communicating and it's fabulous, I can put that to the back of my head and just love it, right? So I might have got a little tangenty there. I apologize.
I love it. Dr. LeBourne,
Jess.
It's good on both of us. So Dr. Wendy LeBourne, she's not the only one, but she was one of the first people that I heard speak in a class about just vocal pathologies and vocal health, and how many of her clients some of them have actual pathologies but that aren't getting worse.
Yeah.
And they leave them alone because it's part of what makes their sound. And I just remember how many voice teachers in the room were like, gasp. And I was like, oh, okay, you can just leave them alone? All right. Well,
Right?
I have definitely learned something today, right? It
Yes.
doesn't always have to, like, a clean tone is not necessarily what everybody wants.
Nope.
Um,
Nope.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
so
we
interesting.
have, I mean, we have a colleague who, and dear friend, who has a little catch in their voice, a little rasp in their voice, and they know it. And then, they gig like crazy. And then when they're in a room full of voice teachers, especially Western classical voice teachers, they feel like maybe I shouldn't talk because they're going to judge me for my voice, right?
Yeah,
Like they
it's a
feel
bummer.
judged because all the Western classical teachers are like, do you know what's going on with your voice?
And it's, yeah, it's right. It's immediate, like, you know, it's like the fat shaming of
Oh,
well, the voice teacher world.
yeah.
I hear this thing in your voice. I'm going to make a lot of assumptions about what you do and don't do and whether that's okay or not, you know.
Exactly, exactly. And
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what you should do? You should have like right on your name tag, I make this much money gigging every year. How much do you make? You know, or something like that.
Yeah, just mind
Or
your business. My voice is fine. I like the
yeah,
sound of my voice.
exactly.
I have zero problems. I'm good to go. Yeah. You know, you're talking about acting because acting is not something in popular music styles that we're particularly interested in, but
Yeah,
embodiment is so
embodiment.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me that somewhere down the line in Western classical training, we decided that body movement was, I don't know, like Park and Bark was sort of our, I mean, I've just so many times our teachers are like, keep your hands at your side, you know, don't do that thing. And not that there aren't certain movements that don't align with what we want to do to embody a song, but in popular musics, I mean, the musics that we have
There are.
learned, dance and music, were
Yes.
married and inseparable. They were the same thing. And so in our pedagogy, in our studios, having people move as a part of what they're doing is so important, that they can move their bodies as they sing. If you watch any singer, they're constantly moving something, feeling the beat in their body in some way throughout the song. And it's supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
And I find a lot of the classically trained, I work with a lot of voice teachers, just, as you do too, Shannon. Yeah. And the funniness they feel in their body to just like to stomp their foot for a whole song or to clap their hands for a whole song, or, you know, it's interesting how that's something babies love to do that, but we don't do that as much. We kind of train that out a little bit. So it ends up feeling funny.
I mean, part of the reason that I think part of the reason that gets trained out of us in our Western classical styles is that we're working so hard to coordinate in such specific ways, through other, you know, through all of this stuff that I can't see. And so we kind of somehow decided that in order to focus on this part, this thing, you know, these other movements aren't useful. And I think we might be coming back around. And I think lots of teachers have, you know, some of the work of Heidi Moss shows why actually hand movements are incredibly useful when you're learning Western classical music as well. And like embodiment is incredibly useful. But I think we somewhere along the line, we confused what a useful and embodiment movement is, and what a compensatory, in the negative sense, movement is in Western classical training, right? And so we kind of threw the whole baby out with the bathwater at some point. And I think that's coming around a little bit more now in Western. It certainly is with the teachers I work with, because I force them to do that, but not force. I
Strongly encourage.
I strongly encourage you to find the movements that are going to be useful to find the coordination you want here. But yeah, so I think that's coming back around. But yeah, I don't know why we decided that you should, or why we decided that in our training that we can't separate what I do in my training from what I do in performance. Like why can't I do all of the movements I need in my training and then concentrate those movements into my face and performance in order to have that, like, so, in order to make it look like nothing else is happening and have that still have that connection and embodiment. Like, why can't I don't know. Students can. I'm sure they can. They're smart.
Yeah. Rochelle says many popular styles prioritize rhythmic feel over technical delivery. Actually, I will say I don't think it's a prioritization.
Yeah.
I think rhythmic feel is incredibly important to us. And we are still technically delivering what we're supposed to for the style at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think they go together. Like, no one's,
that makes sense.
I don't think in general we're like, oh, someone dropped their technique. Like, it's still, our technique is still there. It looks different, sounds different, it's its own thing. But the rhythmic feel it must be there, or else it's not the technique.
Yeah.
And that's what's interesting with a lot of the teachers. As soon as we start to really like stomp, clap, move around the room, feel the music, is how their technique changes and incorporates that rhythmic feel into the sound of their voice. Yeah. It serves the technique. It doesn't detract from it. But it is super important, Rochelle. That's absolutely true. Yeah, Jennifer, all of my students are now asked to self-conduct for pitch movement, and all of them have improved their reading. Yeah, physical. Right. Yeah, our bodies and our minds are connected. Yeah. Absolutely. Improve their reading. It's so true. That's awesome. So Shannon, you have some stuff coming up that will focus specifically on, because we do love technique and our Western classical stuff, right? So some of the things that happen in the body and in the instrument in contemporary voice in particular. Yeah, you want to give us a little summary about what's coming up?
Yeah, so in June, I have a pop-up voice ped class. It's a 90-minute class where I talk about contemporary voice. This is very specifically geared toward voice teachers who have had a Western classical degree, and or who were taught by someone who had a Western classical degree, because it kind of breaks down the physical, not the philosophical things, but the technical things that we were taught in our classical degrees that are actually like open throat sensation, like some of those things that are actually not going to be useful for you, and how to kind of understand that the difference in shaping and what we mean by, like, mode 1, mode 2 and mixing, well, all that stuff. So just to kind of break those down into the sort of anatomy and physiology of contemporary singing, if you will. And I use that word contemporary very much as a contrast to classical, right? So it's this is sort of like really big, broad strokes, but we've been taught really specific things about how to shape the vocal tract, how to use breath, etc., in our classical training, and those very specific things sneak in. Again, they sneak in. So then it's just kind of breaking that down. And then I have a practicum that you're going to be my guest in. In June. And so the class is like, here's the information, download. And then the practicum is, let's apply this. Let's get in each other's studios and let's talk about how we apply, how we're teaching. The philosophy comes in a lot more, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and you are my special Q&A person.
I'm so excited. Well. I can't wait for that.
Yeah, so that information is all on my website, and the registration for the practicum isn't up yet. I'm so sorry. People who've been asking, I'm so sorry. It's coming. Hopefully even by the end of today.
It's okay. They'll be ready. They can sign up for your mailing list.
Yes.
So that when it comes out, they'll be ready.
Right on it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Cool. All right. So Shannon's website is shannon-coates.com. And so you can check all that good stuff out. Man, I'm excited. Yeah. And that'll be focused on the sounds themselves, the voice itself, and today we've been talking about just huge, broad strokes about our training and popular music in general. So that'll be cool for anyone who wants to zoom in on that particular piece of it. And because there's so much stuff, let me just encourage everyone, be zooming in on more than just the voice, dance and philosophy and culture and all the wonderful things. I will recommend one of my favorite books. We were talking about facilitating versus like mentoring or, doing the apprenticeship model. It's called the Mindful Coach. I tell everybody about it. It's so good.
Beautiful.
But sometimes the coaching realm can give us some great tips on how to help someone guide themselves, as opposed to feeling like you have to have all the answers and tell them what to do all the time, since we don't in this music.
Yeah.
Which can be freeing once we accept it, right? Like, I'm not going to know the answers. I'm just going to ask good questions to help the person figure their own stuff out.
Totally.
Cool. All right.
But well,
everyone,
pedagogy too, right? Like
it's true.
That's all really good pedagogy. It doesn't even matter what style you're teaching. We all learn better if we discover it ourselves.
Yes.
No one learns well from like having the information put into our heads, especially in singing, which is a motor skill, right? Like none of us learn it by like getting the words. We all learn better by doing it. So
that's right. That's right. I love it. Hey, friends, someone says they're late. We can't see who you are, but welcome.
That's okay. Come on in.
Hi, Melissa. Yep. Yeah, Rochelle. Depends on definition of technique. Yep. All right, y'all. Well, thank you all so much for coming. With us today was Dr. Shannon Coates, vocal pedagogy expert and creator of the VoicePed Undegree and the vocal instrument. Go to their website, shannon-coates.com, and check out the stuff they've got coming up. There's contemporary voice, but they also do child voice, and there's all kinds of good stuff on there. And I'm Jessica Baldwin, head popular music's voice specialist and artistry coach at True Colors Voice and Artist Development, and creator and editor of Singing and Popular Musics. So you can follow on Facebook and Instagram, True Colors Voice and Artist, and singingandpopularmusics.com is the blog. We've also got a Facebook page. Follow Shannon on all of her things, and you all have a wonderful week.
Beautiful. Bye. Take care.